Hello, this week we cover ethics, which looks at chapter 5 and 6 in our textbook. Chapter 5 focuses on just discussion of what ethics are, ethical theories, where chapter 6 dives a little bit deeper into company ethics and organizational ethics. Okay, so we're going to be discussing ethics and thinking, what do you hear of when you hear the word ethics? So I want you to take a second and think about what comes to mind. When you hear that word, do you think of right or wrong? Do you think of morality? Do you think of religion practices? What do you think of? Okay. And then we get down to that it's actually all of those things. So it is our own personal conception of what is right and wrong. So I say our own personal because ethics are very personal. They are not universal. Everybody does not share the same ethical standard. There's some reading in the chapter about how when they really look at it and try to drill down, there's no such thing as anyone in the world that believes the exact same thing as others. Okay, so it's where we get our own personal ethics and values come from a variety of places. So if we have religious practices and beliefs that we follow, our religion that we follow has its own kind of guide of ethics and what is right or wrong for followers of that religion. We also learn from our family when we're growing up. So we're told not to do things, or that's not good to do, or that, the whole time we're growing up. We go to school and we learn rules about how people behave, how you're supposed to behave. You're not supposed to cheat on your homework. That's unethical, those kind of things. Also, where we grow up influences. So people in one community have social norms. So ethics also come from community norms and social norms, expected behavior, expected conduct. Of course, the media, so the internet, TV, movies, anything that we consume as media, books, influences our beliefs of what is considered right and wrong behavior. And then intuition, which is that gut feeling. So I feel like this is wrong. That comes from, that's called intuition. Okay, different things. So morals are our personal philosophies about what is right or wrong, based on our own perspectives, on our own upbringing, on our own religious behavior. Okay, then we have other words such as ethics, principles, and values. So then ethics being about a group's values. Ethics are considered more community-based. Then our principles, behaviors that should not be violated. So this is more society's principles of what people should and shouldn't do. And then values, so we have beliefs and ideas that are socially enforced. So what should people value? What personal values do we lift up and champion and say people who have these values are more ethical? And that changes from time to time as society has changed. Okay, the 10-80-10 rule of ethics, it looks at society as a whole. So if we took every single person on the planet, 80% of those would do something unethical depending on the situation. So it's a situational thing. If they were forced into a situation to do something unethical, they would do so. 10% of the population would never do anything unethical even if a situation presented itself, they would leave the situation or take whatever consequences, but they would not do an unethical thing. And then the last 10% don't really have an ethical compass. And they don't really think about other people when they're making decisions, and they have no problems doing unethical things. Sometimes this is where things like sociopaths and psychopaths sit. So in testing of sociopaths and psychopaths, they found that they don't have an ethical compass. There is no morality. There's no, they don't feel bad for other people. They don't exhibit empathy or believe in empathy. So they can do things that hurt other people and not think twice about it. So that 10% unethical people, 10% always ethical, and then 80%, it really depends on the situation. Okay. A famous example of this situational is the Donner Party. So if you've never heard of the Donner Party, this is a group of people that was migrating from the Midwest to California in the late 1800s. And they ended up getting stuck in the mountains for 4 months. So they got trapped. They were planning on crossing the mountains, and there was early snowfall that year. They could not get past it, and they ended up getting trapped. There were several rescue parties that tried to rescue them, but people didn't find them until February. About just over half of the party survived that 4 months of being trapped in a mountain range because of snowfall. And one of the ways that they survived was by a cannibalism. And so cannibalism is when you eat humans or you eat your own kind. And so what happened was, in order to survive, they had started eating members of the party that had died. And so this is considered this famous, we would say, oh, cannibalism is always wrong. You shouldn't eat people. That is always unethical. And then some people might say, well, if the person was already dead, it's not the same as murdering them. So you can see how we get into these situational arguments about deciding what becomes an ethical gray area. In this case, it was, they knew it was wrong. They didn't want to do it. It became the only way they could possibly survive. So it just became this, like, you either have to resort to this thing that you don't want to do, or you're going to die. And that is how they had talked themselves into it and rationalized doing so was in order to survive. This Donner Party is actually a very famous case study about human behavior. It's the only time in which people were trapped. In this case, it was in the Sierra Mountains in Nevada. So it's just a very interesting about that situational about, well, would you do an unethical thing to survive? Kind of thing. Okay. So that's this ethical relativism. So kind of the same thing. It's relative to the time, place, circumstance, and the persons involved. So we could say that cannibalism is wrong. Never going to do it. I would never. And this is where also it comes into where you can say, I would never do anything that was unethical. I would never resort to that. I would die first. And then you might get into that situation and find that your ethics are a little bit more gray than you believed in the first place. And so it's really that time in history, that society's traditions, the relative time, place, and circumstance of the persons involved. Okay, so it really depends on how you frame the issue and which lens you're looking through, how that, am I looking from an area of empathy? Am I looking for Professor Summermeyer, if you've had him in class, he worked as an internal auditor for a manufacturing company. And they found that one of their regional salespeople was faking his travel receipts. He was faking his hotel and meal receipts and submitting them for reimbursement when he wasn't actually doing the travel that he was expected to do. And what he was doing was one of his family members had gotten extremely sick. I think it was his mother, and was drowning in medical bills. And so he had justified it to himself that this was a way he could help her with her medical bills. And when he was caught, he said he had always planned to pay it back. He had planned to pay back every dollar he had taken, and that he was just really forced to take because his mother was so sick and he needed to take care of her. And so this is one of those things. It's like, okay, is that, stealing money is unethical, but when you get, okay, why were they stealing it? Another famous example of this always comes down to like stealing bread. Like, do I punish somebody who's stealing bread? Well, do I have to ask why were they stealing bread? Do they have starving siblings at home? Was this the first thing they'd eaten in a week? So you can see how ethics isn't this black or white area, but it really depends. And there's a lot of like, well, what is the situation? How do you frame it? I could say stealing from work is always wrong. Stealing from your company is always wrong. You should not steal from your company. Well, have you ever gotten home from work and found that you had a pen in your pocket? Technically, you just stole from your company. Okay, so you can see how it really depends on the circumstances for that. I accidentally took a pen home. If I return the pen, some companies will say this about internet too, that if you use the company internet for personal purposes, so if I'm sitting in my office and instead of like grading papers or something, I'm on Amazon shopping for something for myself. I don't pay for that internet. I'm on the company's work time. So I'm in my office being paid to be there, part of my scheduled time, and I'm using that time for my own personal benefit. And so there are some companies that say that is stealing from the company, and that's unethical. That if you use the company internet for personal reasons, if you do personal things while you're on company time, that you're stealing from them. Okay, so you have to think about there's a lot of situations that don't make ethics and what is and isn't unethical behavior always the easiest thing to decide. Okay, we'll continue in the next video.